Hello and good evening. Welcome to this fourth and final educational webinar from RoR for the month of February. In a bit of a change from the last few weeks, tonight we're going to be looking at confidence and connection. So just stepping away slightly from the discipline specific. Of course, we've looked at dressage, looked at the jumping and the pole work, and we've also looked into the showing world. But this week, as I say, it's a little bit more onto the confidence and connection. So linking all of the disciplines together, and no matter what you do with your former racehorse, you're of course going to want to aim for the very best confidence and the very best relationship with your horse. Once again, though, I've got three brilliant guests. I'm delighted to say I've got Julie Frizzell, Guy Robertson and Sophie Wells along with me this evening. So they'll all be putting in lots of valuable content, I'm sure. And I'm just going to give them their introduction. So do bear with us, nice long introductions as well, because these guys have got some really great credentials which make them perfect for tonight's webinar. Julie Frizzell, well, she is highly sought after as a leadership and coaching consultant with a gift for creating exceptional professional relationships and bringing the finest leadership theories to life. She's a former RAF wing commander with considerable experience across a number of fields, both domestically and operationally. Since retiring in 2008, Julie has focused on the development of others. She's a gifted facilitator, worked in many areas of the UK workforce and now works with private companies, professional bodies, government departments, the military and the NHS. For several years now, she's been a non-exec director, having held marketing and communications roles, and works a lot in the business development field as well. She's a grounded professional, and as she says in her own words, despite her age beginning with a 5, she remains a committed sportswoman, having represented Great Britain at UK-based international dressage events. With a strong sense of duty, evinced by her role as a parish councillor. Probably won't say too much, and hopefully it won't go down the same route as the Hanford Parish Council tonight, Julie, but good to have her with us. Thank you for coming along, Julie, and we're looking forward to getting lots of content from you as we go through.
Thanks, Mark.
On to Sophie Wells. Well, Sophie, many of you in the dressage world will know the name Sophie Wells. She started riding at the age of 8 at her local riding school, took up non-disabled dressage at the age of 12, and in 2008, she became the first para-equestrian dressage rider to win a non-disabled international competition after she finished first in the junior international class at the Hickstead Under-21 International. She was the first para-equestrian dressage rider to compete in both able-bodied junior team and the para-equestrian dressage team in the same year. That was in 2010. And she competed on the dressage young rider European team before being selected as part of the World Equestrian Games para-equestrian dressage squad. She received an MBE in the 2013 New Year honour list, topping off a fantastic year that saw her take team gold, 2 individual silver medals as well at the London 2012 Paralympics. She won 9 medals. She has won rather 9 medals for Great Britain with her Rio partner Valerius, competing at the 2011 and 2013 European and 2014 World Championships. On her second Games appearance in 2016 at Rio, Sophie won her first individual Paralympic gold on Valerius. And since Rio, she's gone on to win 3 silver medals at the 2018 World Equestrian Games and is now making a name for herself as a coach. And I think that is going to be key in this webinar, because as well as bringing the obvious credentials I've just named there on the riding front, she is now going her way into the coaching world, and we'll talk to her more about that. And last but not least, Guy Robertson. Well, Guy, his relationship with horses began when he was 5 years old. He had a first pony, as he tells us, was a Welsh Section A called Topic. And through the pony club, he eventually progressed to the larger ponies before competing in show jumping and eventing. In 1996, he was introduced to the sport of polo cross, where he managed to combine both passions, sport and horses, and he had an obsession which has taken him all around the world. He captained the UK team for 3 years in test matches against Zimbabwe, South Africa, the USA, New Zealand, Australia, and the Netherlands. Having won numerous national and international titles, Guy retired to concentrate on horsemanship and now spends all his time hosting and running horsemanship clinics and demos all over the UK, as well as across Europe and the United States in normal times, of course. Guy's methods of training have been strongly influenced through his travels around the world and by studying some of the world's great horsemanship trainers. We'll speak to him a little bit about those and the influences a little bit later on. Although his techniques are constantly evolving, he looks to improve and refine them all the time. And he now also trains other students and riders to take some of those skills and put them to use with their own horses. He took part in the first RoR showcase. Well, that was at Aintree in 2018. And the horsemanship demo there with a former racehorse was very informative and popular with the audience. I can vouch for that. I was there. It was brilliant. So delighted to have all three of you with me. So thanks for giving up your evening. And I'm sure our guests are going to really enjoy and come away with something from all three of you. Before we go any further, though, just a reminder to you at home, of course, you are the reason we do these webinars. So as always, please do get involved. Use the people we have with us this evening, and you can send your questions in. I'm sure they'll be happy to answer any questions you've got for them. The theme, remember, particularly confidence and connection, but I'm sure if we get any questions, we'll put them to them. We had fashion advice last week, for God's sake, in the showing world, so we can probably cover most topics. You can do it, as always, in the Q&A section, this Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. So please do that, and as I say, I'll keep checking the questions as we go along, and we'll get to them a little bit later on. So I think a good place to start before we go, as always, we've got a couple of videos, a video and a presentation to show you, but before we get to that, I think worth just checking in with our guests here, just to ask them in a very, I'm almost putting them on the spot here, they don't know I'm doing this, but I just want to ask how important confidence and connection is. Julie and Sophie, I'm going to ask you to, just as a very brief initial introduction, how important confidence and connection really is. And then Guy, I'm going to ask you from the relationship with the horse perspective and how important confidence from the horse is and building confidence with the horse. So Julie, to you first, as an introduction to this webinar, how important is even having this conversation at all?
I think it's at the crux of everything, really. And certainly from the conversations, and I'm very fortunate, I train with Sophie, from the conversations that you have on the ground transmit all the way through and right the way through and into the work that we're going to see, the wonderful work we're going to see from Guy, where, you know, we must have that trust and that connection with the horse, but most of that, to be honest, we must trust ourselves. And I think for me, none of us, or very few of us, are in a position whereby we are made to ride. And I think because there is that element, no matter how small that seed is of confidence, you're choosing to do something. So when we look at this as how we can connect with the riders and connect with the horses, it's a matter of choice. And I think it's down to us as coaches and as specialists to work on a mutually respectful level with whoever's on the horse to help them see just how much they can grow by acknowledging, you know, you're doing this out of choice. Yeah. Let's see how we build those building blocks. And there is no blueprint to what the perfect route is, save for what's right for the route for that person.
Yeah, excellent, Julie. Thanks for starting us off. Sophie, to you. You obviously have competed at the highest level. How important was confidence? And I know we're going to go into this in much more detail, but just as a top line, how important was confidence in your partnerships and your performances and your results?
Yeah, it's massively important. And I think for me, my confidence comes a lot from preparation. Mm-hmm. So if I know that I've ticked all the boxes, I've left no stone unturned, that's when I go into a competition with confidence. Yeah, and like Julie said, it definitely transmits through to the horse, and it can, you know, your mindset can massively make or break any sort of competition or any training session.
Thanks, Sophie. Guy, Sophie touched on it there. It's right, isn't it? It's in our own body language too, and the confidence that we have, of course, is going to pass on to the horse, isn't it, in a competitive or any environment, really?
Yeah, it is. I mean, I think in terms of importance of things that you need to get figured out, connection or focus and confidence in your horse are the two most important things, because it's his mind that drives his feet. His mind dictates where his feet go. So if he's thinking about something else, that thing is influencing his feet. Does that make sense? Yeah. If he lacks confidence and he's scared, then that's what his feet are going to do. They're going to be running away from things. They're going to be trying to avoid things. They're going to be shutting down. They're not going to be going in the direction you want them to go in. So for me, when we start and train a lot of horses, the first thing we're doing is we're trying to get some focus from that horse, some connection. We're trying to get him to feel good about us. We're trying to build his confidence in us. And that's what I'm going to be talking about in this session tonight, is more about from the horse's perspective in terms of gaining his confidence and building his confidence. and you know, like getting that connection and getting that focus from him.
Yeah, I think that's actually going to lead us nicely into your video, actually. So I think we'll go to that now. A video Guy's going to talk over. It's about 4 minutes long. Have a look at this.
Okay, so this is a 8-year-old warm blood gelding that we've got in for training at the moment, and he's a horse that really struggles with his focus, with his connection. And I've been working with him for the last 2 weeks, and I think this is a really good sort of visual representation of what we talk about connection. You see, when I've turned him loose here and I'm just leaving him alone, his mind is not on me. He's having a sniff around the arena. He's turned away from me. There's nothing about his mental state that's connected to me right now. So all I'm going to do is I'm asking him, just, okay, well, if you don't want to be connected to me, if you don't want to be thinking about me, then I'd like for you just to move around the arena and keep those feet a little bit busier, so that you know, you're moving your feet, you're working hard at being away from me mentally. And we'll just let this video roll around a little bit. So you see there's a lot of head shaking, there's a lot of sort of wanting to, frustration in that there's things that he wants to be doing that aren't, you know, necessarily linked to what I want for him to be doing. Now he's decided, actually, I'm going to kind of have a little think about you, and his mind has now started to connect to my mind. I've started to get some focus, and you see, as a result, now wherever I move, he moves. So that connection is starting to translate to the feet. So I've got his focus. When I move my feet, he moves his feet. And I always think that, and now again, like, see, he's decided he's got some other things on his mind, so we again push him back out into the work. But I always think when you turn them loose, when they have a bit more of a choice in terms of how they want to behave or what they want to do, we start to see exactly how connected that horse is, exactly how focused that horse is on us. And here he is, he's decided, he's so unfocused at the moment, he's decided he wants to have a little bit of a roll and carry on. Now, I don't mind if the horse is connected or disconnected. If he's disconnected or he's unfocused, then I'm going to make sure that he's working a little harder than maybe he'd like. When he starts to connect and when he starts to focus on me, I need to make sure that he feels good in doing that. I need to make sure that when he's thinking about me, when he's around me, that feels good to him, that he enjoys being connected to me. He enjoys being focused to me. That's when he feels good. It doesn't necessarily mean that he has to feel bad the other times, and I for sure wouldn't want him to have any negative associations with me, but that he's working a little bit harder than maybe he would like. And this is something that we can apply in every area when we work with our horse. When that horse is connected, when he's focused, we make sure he feels good. Okay, so here he comes in. His mind's now on me again. He's connected to me mentally. He's thinking about me mentally. He's worked at being away from me. He's worked at that being sort of disconnected, if you like. And now he's wanting to be around me. He's made a choice and a decision to change what he's doing. And again, that then translates to the feet. Now that he's connected mentally, his feet now get soft. His feet do what my feet do. They mirror what my feet are doing. They mirror my intention. Wherever I go, he mirrors that. And that's something that we can carry into the ridden work. We can carry into every facet of our relationship with that horse. When he's connected and focused, he weighs nothing. His mindset is, as long as he understands what it is that he's supposed to be doing, he's with me. He's got nothing else on his mind because he's connected.
Thank you for that, Guy. So I think a good place to start very early on in that video, and actually just as you were leading into it as well, you spoke about the horse's feet. Now, Anybody that follows this, and we actually spoke about this right at the beginning of these webinars, we actually mentioned it back in December. I spent some time with Dr. Andrew McLean, who's just one of them out there who looked into this. This is a scientific, this is backed up by science. So a lot of this stuff about the way a horse learns and the responses it gives, this isn't just sort of fluffy ideas. This is actually, a lot of this work is supported by the way a horse learns, isn't it? And controlling the feet sounds quite simple and quite basic, but actually, as a herd animal, flight animal, this is essential for everything we want to do with a horse, isn't it?
Well, yeah, I mean, if you're going to ride a horse, you'd want to have control of its feet. You know, it'd be like driving a car and not having control of the tires. You know, you're going to end up in a ditch at some points. And a lot of times, the only thing that's keeping people alive is the horse's self-preservation, to want to stay upright, because a lot of people don't really have an ability to direct their horse's feet round with any real accuracy. But what I would suggest is that most people's focus is on the physical all the time. It's about physically dominating the horse, or physically directing the horse, or physically riding the horse. You know, and when I grew up through the pony club and things, and that was all we talked about, was the physical aspects of it. But for me, the focus initially has to be on the mental. Now, you're going to have to do something physically to create that relationship. You're going to have to do something physically to create that connection, like we spoke about with that little video, in terms of, you know, letting him work a little bit of being away from us, letting him be comfortable being around us. Those are physical things that I'm doing, but my intent, my mind, is to try and establish a mental connection to where that I'm at the forefront of that horse's mind. He's thinking about me and nothing else. He's totally focused on me, because once he gets to that point there, then I have that ability then to say, okay, you're listening, well then let's go over here, let's move over here, let's go over here together, let's go over here together, you know. And then we can then take that principle and apply it to the ridden just the same way. So I want to speed my horse's feet up, I want to slow them down, I want to take them left or right, you know. But it's the mind that we had to get first. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, like I say, I mean, my experience was with Andrew, and obviously we're going to talk about the different influences that you've had over the years. I remember being quite demoralized the first time we went for some training to him, where he had us, we thought we were going to be doing all this riding work and doing everything. And actually he had us for the first few days holding them in hand and just with a school, making them step backwards and forwards and just controlling. Where do you start when you're starting off, and people watching this, where would you start from scratch now with this sort of concept? What would be the first step?
I mean, the starting point is the relationship between that person and their horse. And I like to get there, and then they'll say, oh, where do you want me tacked up? I say, no, just leave it in the stall or leave it in the paddock. Let's go and see. Because they'll walk up to the stall door and that horse is pushing on them. They go in there, the horse is walking on them, he's stepping on them. They halter him and it's a wrestling match. They take off his rug, it's a wrestling match. And then he drags them to wherever we're working. A lot of people are thinking that the training's starting when they get to the arena, except that that horse is so disconnected from the moment they got there. If they just opened the door and stepped out the way, the horse would have disappeared off to the paddock, or he'd have disappeared off to see his friends. That's where his mind was. And they never did anything to change that. They never did anything to reconnect that horse, to get his attention and his mindset back on them, for example. So I would fix it right from the moment you get to that stable door. You've got a vision in your head, an idea of how you want this to go, so that you get to the stable door, you know, you want maybe that horse to step back a step so you can get in without being crowded. So you ask for that, you work to that end. You want that horse, when you halter him, just to stand there quietly, maybe lower his head a little bit to make it easy for you. And you halter him, stand there while you rug him, you know, walk at the same speed you're walking to the arena. Do you see what I mean? There was so much that happened before you ever got to the arena, that the horse was aware of you and he was aware of where your mindset was. You just weren't aware of where his was.
Yeah, and on the ground, obviously, you sort of use the pressure release concept, don't you? Which actually reflects when you get on the horse anyway, doesn't it? I'm sure Sophie, when we talk to her later on, with the aids you give the horse, if you're just keeping the pressure on and you're not taking it off and you're nagging at the horse, you know, it's all about that pressure release concept, isn't it?
Yeah, we talk about negative or positive reinforcement, and negative reinforcement is you're reinforcing the behavior. You provide an adverse stimulus, And when the horse responds correctly, when he moves away from that, or he does what you want him to do, you remove that stimulus, and that's therefore his reward. You're reinforcing that behavior. You could do it by positive reinforcement, so that when the horse did what you wanted, you added something to that. You know, a treat or a stroke or a scratch or something like that. And I think, you know, that's all important. But I think that, again, if we could just take it back to where people are more aware really of where it's not about the training technique they're using, it's the lack of awareness they have for where their horse is at mentally. You know, what's he thinking about? What's on his mind? Is he connected to you? And before you even talk about negative reinforcement or positive reinforcement or training techniques or how to do this or how to do that, or, you know, you're still too far down the line. If you ask people what's their goal, what's their vision, how do they want this to go, they don't have an idea. They might when they ride them, and they might when they get in the arena go, oh, I'm going to work on my circle stay, I'm going to work on my lead changes stay, but they're not detailed enough all of the time. They're not specific enough and accurate enough all of the time. They're not aware of where that horse's mindset is. And that, I think that's the thing that I come across the most. Lots of people use lots of different techniques and they have a lot of success with them. And technique's not as important as, like I said, that awareness from the human, that connection from the human to the horse, an awareness of where he's at mentally. Because the more aware you are of them, the more aware they become of you. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. But I mean, I suppose we're dealing with a topic that's probably similar to something like feel, isn't it? It's one of those things which some people seem to pick up quite quickly and can assess a situation, and other people it doesn't come maybe as easily. If people watching this that literally want to get started in trying to think more about where their horse's mindset is, what sort of things would you be reminding them that are key components to assessing where they are before training?
Be mindful. When you go to catch your horse, all you think about is catching your horse. Notice him. Notice how he behaves. Notice how he looks. Notice how he responds to you. Be mindful of the changes in him. Remember them for next time. You know, don't be thinking about what you're going to have for tea when you're going to catch your horse. Don't be thinking about, you know, what you've got to do that evening when you're working with your horse. Be there in the moment and aware of that horse, because that's where he is. And if you're disconnected from him, he's going to be thinking about something else. But if you're aware of him, he might become more aware of you too. And I think that would be my biggest tip. Be mindful and be really particular about the really small little details. Have that vision in your head of what you want this to go like, how you want it to look, and how you want them to behave.
Absolutely. And I appreciate that you don't want to go too far down the training route, I suppose, before you've got these components and the fundamentals right. But in terms of the exercise we saw you doing, would that be something which our viewers could maybe do, go and loose school their horse and just sort of, you know, read the horse's body language, if you like, and just, is there any sort of thing that benefit for them in that way?
Yeah, I think so. And I think because it becomes less of a domination, you can't dominate a horse at liberty. I mean, you can misuse that round penning, and you've got to be really careful, because I do see people chasing these horses around and kind of, you know, running them out of air and things, which I think is totally wrong. And then you get the degree of learned helplessness, which I think is not going to obviously improve your relationship. But working horses at liberty and is a good way of trying to improve as a horseman, because you've lost your ability to intimidate that horse. You've lost that that horse has more choice, and then you can start to get that horse to choose your thing. You can start to work on getting that horse to choose your choice, if that makes sense. You learn how to allow him to work a little bit about doing one thing that you don't want him to do, and allow him to find relief in something else. So yeah, it's definitely something I like to do a lot of my students. It's something that every horse that comes into my training program, we work through that at the start, because like I said, it's not a wrestling match anymore. You know, it's not about me physically intimidating him or trying to make him do something. It's about allowing that horse to choose my thing. It's allowing that horse to, you know, to find some comfort in connecting with me.
And roughly, I know that this is how long it is a piece of string and it's all going to come down to the individual, but roughly how long would those loose schooling sessions be in those early stages? What would you say is the sort of minimum, maximum?
you know, my goal to start with is just getting them to connect to me, and you know, that can take a few minutes, maybe 10 minutes maximum. You wouldn't want to do it for too long.
Yeah.
You know, you take out that halter out the equation, you take out that lead rope, and that horse has really got to think, and it can be quite tiring for them at times. So I have sort of, you know, like a process that I go through where I have a step one where I just want that horse to what I call find me. And that could be as simple as just stopping at the outside of the arena and looking at me, so that he starts to look at me a little more than maybe he would before. Maybe he's tipped to the outside, he starts to look at me. Well, for some horses, day one, that might be enough. You know, they might work a little bit at getting to that stage, but I certainly wouldn't want to be working on it for more than 15 minutes maximum. And if they're running around and they're not thinking, then there's no value to it anyway. So quit doing that, and you might want to work at something else. But I'd say for 80% of horses, that's where I start. And I'd say maximum 10 minutes. I'd usually have them pretty connected, pretty soft, and that's my goal. It's not my ego. It's not to have these horses following me around and saying, oh, look how good I look. It's about getting that horse to find some comfort in being around me. And that's all I'm interested in.
And surely this is as much about training the human part of this as well, because as with any sort of loose schooling generally, you know, body language, your body in the wrong place can result in a completely opposite in the desired effect.
Absolutely. I mean, your horse is just a reflection of where you are and where you're at. You know, the older I get, the better my horses seem to go. And that's not because I'm riding better horses. It's because I'm offering a little bit more, you know, and I hope 5 years time, you know, I'm almost embarrassed about where I am now, because that's what it is about. Like, you've got to put the onus on yourself to improve. You know, people, you know, can be embarrassed about asking for help. They can be embarrassed about going to clinics and things. But anyone I know that's had any success is learning all the time. They're trying to improve all the time. They're trying to strive to be better. And your horse is just like, he's like a guinea pig. You can go and practice with him. You're practicing your horsemanship. No one knows more about being a horse than a horse does. I can tell you everything about horses, but I don't know as much as a horse knows about being a horse. And they might tell me I'm wrong. So improve yourself, work on yourself, you know, use your training sessions as a practice. Don't worry about making mistakes. Don't worry about going out there and it not working out. Just try and analyze why it didn't work out, and next time, you know, build on that. You know, like I said, the horses are guinea pigs. Practice with them, improve with them, help them, and then the next one you come across, you'll do a better job.
Yeah, absolutely. Final question before we move on to the next section. In terms of equipment, what kind of equipment are we looking at? What sort of head collars are you dealing with? What sort of ropes are we dealing with? Whips?
Not important.
Not important.
Not important. I like to use a longer lead rope, because I feel like, you know, these little short 4-foot lead ropes can, you know, are not really that useful. You know, if you need to let that horse, give him a bit of room, or he wants to wants to kick his heels up or something, like, I'd rather my lead rope was longer than his legs, you know, if he's kicking out or something like that. And I like to use a flag, and I use rope halters sometimes, but that's mainly because of the durability of them. I have some horses that don't particularly like the rope halters. Maybe they're a bit sensitive. I put a flat halter on them. People get really bothered about equipment, like I sell you this stick and it's going to change your world. It's not. It doesn't. It's an inanimate object. You know, you use what you're comfortable with so that you can communicate your intent to your horse to the best of your ability. It does not matter what that is, because, like, again, I've been around really good horsemen that say, oh, I like using this halter, I like using this stick. It's just personal preference so that you can communicate your intent to your horse. But yeah, don't get hung up on gear.
Yeah, and you can be all the gear, no idea, can't you, anyway? So
Most of the time.
Thank you for now, Guy. Brilliant. We're going to move on to the next section, and this is a little bit more now about rider confidence, and we're going to hand over to Julie, who's going to pick up a presentation. Over to you, Julie.
Thanks. I really like what Guy said there about the comfort and the connection. I think we almost feel as if we've won in our relationship with our horse. The time when you really realize that they trust you, it could be on a hack, it could be in a competition, it could even be, as Guy said, in the stable. And I think that feeling, that probably what Guy said there really epitomizes for me what we talk there about, that second part, that connection part. To sit on a horse and to feel them trust you I think is quite a humbling experience. We're not going to have death by PowerPoint tonight. There's literally only 6 slides, but it's helpful, I think, if both Sophie and I, and as Guy's just said there as well, we can reassure everybody that no one is alone in going through any of the challenges that any of us have had. And irrespective of where we sit in different parts of the sport, we've all had the confidence challenges. We've all had the feeling where the day where you feel you can't ride, the day where you feel you don't even get on, especially with some of our RoRs, and it can be weather dependent too. So we've all been there. And although Sophie has worked extensively with full thoroughbreds and with Barney Namibian, who you can see here, there is a huge replication in the sharpness of very fit competition horses that we all see in our RoRs day to day. So as Mark has said, I will do a Professor Tam and ask for the next slide, please. Now, what many people will see, and this is again helping us where we have the self-confidence to do what we do, and then the perceived confidence. Many of us will see and judge on the 2 extremes. Now, these 2 are several years apart. Namibian, who came to me through Godolphin rehoming and lifetime care, is on the left-hand side there that you see, where he won the Queen's Vase at Royal Ascot. He also then went on to win the Gordon Stakes at Goodwood. You fast forward to last September, and I think quite a few of us were over the moon that we were able to have an RoR show at Aintree. And many people will just see the difference between him winning the Queen's Vase and suddenly that horse is then winning a medium. If we go to that next slide, Tony, please. So the difference that we would see and on a day-to-day basis is almost naked to the spectator. But actually, it's the small changes. And I really like what Guy said there about riding their brains, because from day one, if I didn't occupy a very different shaped Barney that we see on the left-hand side here in 2015, if I didn't occupy him, they occupy themselves. And it's absolutely the same as what Guy was saying, but maybe we do it in different ways, but the principle is the same, for us to occupy their brains. Now, from that, we encourage a connection. Now, for me, this is where we want to look at that positive catch-22. The more we feel the connection, the greater the confidence can grow. The more confident we feel, the more we dare channel and try and connect with them a little bit more. Next one, please, Tony. However, and I loved what Guy said about it's where their feet are. There are confidence dismantlers that happen to all of us, both in and out of competition. And I know that Barney might be quite proud of some of the shapes that he throws. And indeed, it's reassuring in a lovely way that when I am in training sessions with Sophie and he does throw some of these moves, it can be quite entertaining to hear your coach laughing before all 4 feet hit the ground again. But if we go to the next one, what I would say, though, is that we are very fortunate to have some successes, but, and importantly, I think what we must not solely focus on are the rosettes. Next one, please, Tony, because I think if when you look, confidence and connection is always strengthened. Not all wins have rosettes. And I think particularly when we push ourselves into a competitive environment, we sometimes lose sight of the little things, but those little things might be hugely important to the relationship that you've got with your horse. Whether it's the 7-year-old that you tap into that always wanted a pony, and you know, where my husband there took a picture of me kneeling on the floor with Barney. Now that in itself is trust. The fact that one of our old sheep is on our grass arena field that we use, or whether it's down to hacking with a friend who helps you push through a confidence barrier. I might have been very comfortable going down a centre line in a small international environment, certainly nothing compared to what Sophie's done. But but it terrified me, and I needed proper brave pants on, 3 pairs probably, to go out and do a hack. Yeah, it's working with a friend. We've been able to do that. So the key thing we must take away from this is that the connection will build the confidence will build the connection, and not every win has a rosette. Thank you, Tony.
Julie, that was brilliant. Thank you for that. And Julie, that's actually something that I've been saying and discussing with the guests over the last few weeks about the term little wins, because this is absolutely true. And myself as a commentator, you as competitors, you know, we see all these different things in the arenas and we just go, oh, you know, another test. But actually, that one particular combination, managing to get through a free walk on a long rein without disappearing off into the distance, for that one individual may be absolutely huge. Just getting it onto the lorry that day and bringing it to the show might be huge.
Oh, absolutely. And, you know, again, it's very similar to what Guy was saying. And I know Sophie will come onto this as well, but it's if you ride their brain and you can connect with them, they have no idea why you suddenly a different person. And how many of us say, or we'll have heard say, he's fine until I go around the outside of the whiteboards, or he's fine until I hear the bell go, because something inside of us ties up, and it must to them figures out, well, where's mum or dad gone? So for some of that, we almost need a confidence front at times, and if that helps us get through it, then great. But equally, the number of friends, colleagues, clients, and if you think peer group, that will beat themselves up because something went wrong in that test or in that event or wherever. Well, I think I'd give myself 10 minutes to be fed up, but actually only ever be fed up properly if that's the last ever time you're ever going to do that. Because what we need to do is that change in mindset of thinking, actually, I'm going to grow from that. I am going to find a positive in there so I can move on from it next time. Now, it's very easy to say, but I am absolutely not there a lot of the time when I put my competitor hat on. So we all face it.
But I think we also need to give ourselves credit in the horse world too. I mean, obviously all sports have the issue of confidence, of course, at the elite level. We'll come to Sophie in a minute on this. But every sport has this. But in the horse world, we're dealing with a biological entity as well, just to throw things in the mix. You know, you can be in the best shape of your life, but, you know, you're dealing with a horse on that day. They're very reactive to how your body language changes. And that sort of is twice the difficulty almost.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the people who we all look at and you think, oh, you make it look easy. Actually, they're probably the people that have put all of this background work in. You know, Sophie mentioned about not leaving one stone unturned, and that's about her or the horses. Guy said about, you know, don't think about what you're going to do in the arena. Think about what his eye or her eyes look like when you walk up to the stable. It's a fair guess that if you're pushed out of the way and you're mown down just before you're trying to get a head collar on them, that might bode well. We might be wise to learn from that. Equally, again, by having some of those real key foundation elements that we're all talking about and doing them well, sets us up to be confident in more environments. And I think for me, that's the case, that as we build and we grow in terms of skill set, it shifts our comfort zone. And do you know what, even in a simple session I remember saying to Sophie once, well, I feel better about that was outside of my comfort zone, and quick as a flash was shift your comfort zone then. And sometimes we need light bulb moments like that, and that's not just relative to it's not just discipline specific.
And there's the whole paralysis by analysis, isn't there, when you sort of focus so much on something that you end up actually completely and utterly creating a problem that maybe wasn't really there in the first place, or wasn't as bad as you thought it was.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know what, something as simple, and the folks that are watching can try this as well, is as basic as when you're riding around the arena, appreciate the little things the horse gives you. If you're in a dressage arena and your horse comes to a corner and they turn, they're helping you. Recognize it. It's little things like that. And even putting that in, you know, right at the very start of thinking, well, you've provided that means that, you know, you've got boards on the inside. Clearly, if the fence is helping you, that's a bit of a cheat. But trying that, you know, of putting corners down and just seeing if the horse has got that learned behavior. And for us, never taking for granted learned behavior that we've taught the horse or we've asked the horse to do. And again, it's those tiny little things of appreciation. I think it's very easy for us to forget how far we've come. And that, to be honest, it's easy to say, isn't it? And I think this falls also, Mark, into that bucket of where someone's always looking for something new. Guy said this, that's why I was smiling when he said about, oh, you know, a different trainer's got a new stick or a new gadget. The common one is, if I change his bit, will that change things? Well, it might, but probably not. Sometimes we just need to do the right things well, rather than looking for a new fix.
I think this ties in really nice now to go to Sophie, because Sophie, you actually said at the very beginning of this entire webinar that something that gives you confidence is preparation. I think the first question I'll put to you, though, is nerves don't really exist, do they, with you top elite riders? You don't look nervous to me when you trot into the arena.
At all. No, and I think, you know, everyone's human, and for me, nerves are a good thing. You know, nerves mean you care. It means that whatever you're doing is important to you, otherwise you wouldn't really be bothered about the outcome. But it's about trying to control those nerves and see it as a positive and see it as something that can enhance you. But I think going to what Guy was saying earlier, and he was saying about noticing your horse, I think, you know, the biggest thing for riders is noticing yourself, you know, noticing your breathing, noticing the tone in your muscles, noticing what you're thinking about. You know, we are so busy in the culture that we have these days. We've always got the phones on, we've always got a million things going at once, that we're never really present unless we are consciously present. So you have to make that conscious decision to let go of everything that is happening and be present with what you're doing at that time, whether that's being on a webinar and not having your phone, or being, you know, having that hour with your horse. You know, if that's the time that you choose to have with your horse, make it count. And the same thing as you go around the outside of the arena, if you're at the Olympics, or, you know, you're at an unaffiliated dressage around the corner, you know, noticing yourself and being mindful and present, so that you're in a place that then you can notice your horse. Because yeah, if you can't be honest with yourself and see what is actually happening within you, you know, you're not going to be able to notice anything else.
And like I was just saying then to Julie, if you've trained your horse in one particular way and you do things a certain way at home, and then you get to a competition and you start changing things because you are very, very tense, the horse is suddenly going to get a bit of a shock, isn't he?
Absolutely. I mean, you know, I get asked the question quite a lot, you know, like, what do you do differently when you go abroad for the first time? And my answer is absolutely nothing. You know, you've got the same 20 by 60 arena or whatever, you know, you're doing exactly the same test as you do in your own country or in your own arena at home. And the reason why you've got there is for doing what you do. I mean, there's so many different roads to Rome, and I'm, you know, very open to learning things about, you know, other people's methods and different ways of getting there, because every horse is different and they all respond differently, as is every rider. And I think, you know, being open to that, but also sticking to a process. So, you know, if you're going to change something because you've been on the webinar tonight, then be consistent. Be consistent with that change and give it time to be able to work. You know, us all going out tonight and spending 10 minutes trying to put a head collar on, or getting a horse to notice, and then walking away and being like, it doesn't work. Like, nothing's going to work in one go, you know, in 10 minutes. Nothing's going to miraculously change. But, you know, the biggest thing is habit. You know, things that we do, our unconscious habits particularly, are what's going to come out in stressful situations. So yeah, consistency and awareness, definitely.
And again, back to the preparation element, surely that sort of could get you, if we're talking about sort of building up confidence currency, surely preparing really well at home is going to just put a little bit more in the bank in terms of the confidence. Because if you're going to a freestyle and you've never ridden a horse in an arena with people there with music blaring, really, or you're going to a horse trials and you've not really ever jumped a ditch fence and there's a big trachena that pops up, surely by preparing literally everything as best as you can anyway, you're giving yourself a bit of confidence currency.
Definitely. And I think, by putting yourself under more pressure at home in a comfortable environment, so that you and your horse putting yourself under pressure. So I had a great quote today on my uni course, and it was about a lobster, and a lobster grows, and the time where it sheds its shell is when it feels pressure. So if they then scurry off and get to a safe place, and then they shed their shell, and then they grow a new shell that's bigger, and then they grow again, and then when it feels under pressure, they get a new one. Whereas some people will feel under pressure, and then they'll take the pressure away because they don't like it, and then they shrink again so that they don't feel the pressure. And I think, that's an amazing, for me, like an amazing visual of the fact that actually we need to keep putting ourselves under that pressure at home in a controlled environment where it's a safe space, that you've set yourself up that you can succeed under that pressure. There's no point taking your horse out and doing something that you're not prepared for and it's going to fail and then you're going to lose confidence. Yeah. Like it's got to be a process. But I think you've got to almost put yourself under more pressure so that when you go and compete, it's easy. So like train hard, fight easy. And I think that's for me, that's one of the biggest things, is that when I go into a competition, it then feels easier because I've done all the work at home and I have prepared. And that doesn't mean I go in with confidence that I'm going to win.
Yeah.
That's not confidence for me. My confidence is that I'm the best prepared that I can be with the horse, that I can deal with anything that's thrown at me. Yeah. I never go in, confidence to me isn't, I'm going to go in and win and I'm going to get 90%. Like, to me, that's more arrogance. But I think you've got to define confidence, for yourself. It is, probably the starting point. For me, it's going in confident in my horse's ability, in my own ability, and the fact that we can, handle anything that's thrown at us, to then be able to do a good performance.
Absolutely. And Julie, back to you. As riders, we need, I suppose, the words to bring away from what Sophie was saying. We need resilience in that we're not always going to go and win. So we need to be able to prepare for the fact that it's not always going to go right. And humility as well as all the confidence and the consistency in the preparation.
Yeah, absolutely. And it doesn't matter what environment you're in, there is only one thing you can guarantee in terms of controlling performance, and that's your own. And to be honest, that's irrelevant as to whether we're on a horse or we're in a professional environment. It's very difficult to use up some of your spare capacity, which is often tapped into and drained by nerves. And that doesn't have to be in a competition, because it could be that someone is very nervous about even just getting on in the first place, but there is a motivator to you doing that. No one is making you get on the horse. There is something inside of you that is a desire, no matter how small that is. And I think once you're then able to build those very small building blocks and repeat good habits, as Sophie said and as Gaia said, then that's where we start moving forward. But I think the moment that we forget that the person is a person on the horse, and that's when things start to be, I wouldn't say superficial, almost more a little bit fragile. And I think that's where you've got to be. As Sophie said, you've got to be very honest with yourself about yourself. Now, many of us are very good at trying to believe we should be doing something. And it takes a fair dollop of self-confidence to actually sit back and go, do you know what, I am good here. This is where I'm good, and I'm going to build from there, rather than feeling that you have to put a front on.
And when people come to you with their horses, and obviously people watching this who may be at the start of their RoR journey, so they could have, you know, this sort of bumps in the road or days when things don't feel like they're going quite so well. Generally, where do you start when you're coaching? And I'll put the same question, I think, to Sophie. Where do you start with these partnerships? Do you start with the person, the human, or do we start with the horse, or do we take both straight away from the off?
I think for me, I need to start with the person. I think there needs to be a mutual respect, a platform of mutual respect, because very few people have got to that level of even presenting themselves with a horse without having something about them. Because let's face it, and especially through the winter, what we do as a hobby is not easy. Our bodies feel battered most of the time. And we strive for things. So we are naturally, that person is already naturally committed to being with the horse and trying to strengthen that relationship with the horse. So for me, it's understanding professionally what somebody does, because their background will always impact their learning style. How something is delivered to that person needs to be how they want it, not how I want to deliver it. And this is where there are so many things that map across from professional leadership and coaching and management areas right the way through into what's written. Ideally for me, the last thing I want to do is have to ride the horse from the ground, if that makes sense, of, you know, pull here, use that leg. However, directly contradicting myself, without the knowledge of how to achieve something, it's very difficult. So there's got to be a balance. But equally, having the awareness, the people awareness for me, of knowing where that person's boundaries are, and knowing that as a coach, you can control the situation. And that situation in executive coaching would be between me and the coachee.
Yeah.
You then need to add into 600 kilos with a brain, an attitude and a personality. So there is clearly a triangle dynamic there. But for me, if someone was to start with the horse, they could be missing something really crucial in connecting with the person that's on board.
I think your approach is really good. It's also very modern, and it's a much more modern approach, isn't it, to look at the type of learner they are? Because I think horses, equestrian generally, has been a little bit slow to catch up in terms of the way people are taught and the coaching methods, really.
Yeah, absolutely. And to be honest, even if let's put it in very basic terms, from a coach, I can quite easily sell it as actually it's the selfish way, not selfless, it's the selfish way that you need to coach. It's the swiftest way to make sure that your message gets across by making the effort, front loading the effort and trying to get to know the person and what makes them tick, because otherwise you'll spend 40 minutes trying to explain how to turn left. Not literally, clearly, but I think it's really crucial that you level the playing field. And don't get me wrong, that doesn't mean to say that, you know, we're not often starstruck. We all were. I think the first time I rode in an arena with Sophie, I nearly ran her over. But, you know, it does happen to us all. But you've got to, for me, it's the coach's responsibility to provide that level playing field, that there is guaranteed mutual respect.
Yeah, and Sophie, the way we do things now, as we've just been alluding to, it's not just the teaching. The actual confidence issue is something which the horsey world didn't really do very well, sort of in the 90s and before then, really. And it was sort of Pippa Funnell was one of the ones which sort of came up with the whole needing to go and see a sports psychologist at that time, when she was, of course, on her way to the Grand Slam. And she didn't make it cool. I think that's not a very good expression, but she certainly started to break down some of the walls and sort of said, actually, I'm struggling a little bit with my confidence. I need to address this. And I think this all plays into it, doesn't it? Elite riders, elite athletes are still struggling with nerves, and they're still having to address how to optimize their performance.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, I can tell you a little bit of a story if we've got time about
Go for it.
My mindset between London and Rio. And I think, you know, it relates to everybody in one context or another, but about when you know, if you've had a successful competition, or you've won a championship, or you have expectation from yourself or from others to replicate that, So I went into London as world and European champion. I was very much expected to win individual gold in London at 22. I didn't. I felt like a massive failure. And that's no disrespect to winning silver. Like I can sit back and look that silver is a great achievement. But for me, in the very small bubble that I was in, and with the elite mindset that we train, we put so much time and effort in to winning ultimately, I became obsessed, be open in saying, in the outcome. So between London and Rio, I became very obsessed in the outcome, be that the scores that the judges were giving me, the results, you know, my competitors, and I completely lost sight of why I did it, like the enjoyment of the horses. It wasn't an enjoyable time because you know, all I was thinking about was how I was going to win in Rio. And then you know, I had some successful competitions between London and Rio, European champion, worlds, I came second again. But I got to the beginning of Rio year and I realized, you know, I had a massive shake-up thinking that I needed to change something, and that my mindset needed to change because it wasn't healthy, it wasn't working. And you know, that's not to the outsiders, you know, from you look down the list of results that I had and it was going fine, you know, you wouldn't think, oh God, you know, she'd had a car crash. But in my mind, it was not going fine. And it took, we had a talk from a guy James Kerr, who wrote Legacy, which was about the New Zealand All Blacks, the rugby team. And it largely came basically about the process, you know, so what they did, the habits that they had, the beliefs that they had, the values that they had, that basically made them successful and made them, like, humility was a massive part of it. And I mean, you know, I look back and I was very hard on myself. You know, I wanted all the criticism basically so that I could better myself, because you know, if I wasn't getting the scores I wanted the information to be better. But I didn't use it in a healthy way. So I started working with an old psychologist that I'd worked with. She'd been on maternity leave and had like 3 kids between kind of 2010 and then 2015. And I started working with her again, and we literally did a massive load of work on my values, what was important to me, why I started riding in the first place, which was the love of the horses. And actually, yes, I love competing, but if someone made me choose training or competing, I choose training every day. Like, I love it. I haven't missed competing in lockdown. I've missed the adrenaline buzz and the pressure, but I haven't missed competing, because I get my pleasure from the small wins of daily training, you know, the progress that young horses make, and yeah, that's my pleasure. But I'd lost that mindset. So going into Rio, like, we did loads and loads of work on what was important to me, and taking it away from the outcome. And I competed in Rio. I did my individual test. It went as well as I could possibly have hoped it would have gone. At the time, you know, I can still look back now and I'm like, that was awful. You know, because you develop all the time. You hopefully you get better and you learn more, and you keep yourself open to that growth. But I was very present in that moment, and I was very, you know, I focused on my breathing, which is, you know, something that I'm, you know, going into Tokyo or preparing for Tokyo last year, I set on working on my breathing and my flow state. So I was very present and connected with the horse and aware of what my energy was doing. And it sounds it can sound daft to some people, you know, the people that want to get on and pull and shove and make it look amazing.
I don't think it does actually sound daft. I think that firstly, that was absolutely brilliant. So thank you for sharing that with us, because it's quite a personal story really. But I think this is important that we hear more of these kind of stories, because it, you know, to some people, getting to do a prelim test at their local equestrian centre is traumatic in the thought of going and doing it. And I think being able to relate to somebody that's at the top of their game, like yourself, and there are other sports, aren't there? You know, there are other athletes. I mean, follow athletics. Katarina Johnson-Thompson was another one which had all the promise. She came along just after Jess Ennis in the heptathlon world. And she again went into Rio, expected to be stepping straight into the throws. There was a lot of external pressure. Something got to her. It just didn't work. She did go on later on when she sort of regrouped, put out some of those external pressures. And I think it was 2019, she was a world champion in Doha. But how important is actually keeping some of the external pressures and the things that are going on around you and that expectation, and just keeping it, as you say, down to the here and now, my horse doing the job which we need to do?
Yeah, I think it's massively important, and probably the biggest word that's relevant is perspective. Mm-hmm. You know, we put so much pressure on ourselves, and reality is, whatever discipline you do, we're riding around in circles in a sandpit, or we're, you know, jumping over plastic poles in a sandpit, or, you know, we're doing something that, you know, we're very fortunate to be able to do. It's not life or death. It can be life or death, but in terms of like the world, and you know, lockdown massively has given us perspective with the pandemic. It doesn't mean it's not relevant with everything that everyone's going through themselves, and the frustration, and there's a lot of emotions that are involved with it, but the perspective that it can give us hopefully takes that pressure off, actually, you know, our expectations in the arena. And I think, you know, relating to Julie, I think Julie, when you won at Aintree last year, like part of, I hope you don't mind me saying, part of what you were concerned slightly about was that pressure and that expectation to repeat success that you'd done before. And actually that's exactly the pressure that I felt, you know, from that outcome pressure and changing it to the process.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that was some people would say you should look at it as a compliment, but I overheard someone in the stables of saying, oh, that's Namibian. Purely, I'm sure they meant that I wasn't Namibian, but that was the Namibian's rider. And they said, oh, that's the one you've got to beat. And I have to say, I almost felt destroyed. It's like, well, you know, if I wasn't putting enough pressure on myself already, there's like the world's against me. And there weren't. And it was one comment. And now I would look at that positively, because actually I needed to have that control. As Sophie said, you know, I needed to have that control to stop the thoughts relating to what I'd heard, and to control myself in that actually it's not a failure. It's not a failure not to win. And that's really hard for us sometimes. And I roared the first test. We did 2 tests then. I roared the first test thinking, oh, I'm just going to play it safe. And it didn't work. Well, he came second, but the placing was irrelevant. It didn't feel the way I knew it should feel. And that's where, going back in for the second test, it was a case of, do you know what, you've got nothing to lose, just get a grip. And it's not in terms of like making that strength get a grip, but actually come at this the way, it's a bit like physician heal thyself, isn't it? Of like, you should just take a dose of your own medicine. As Sophie said, you know, think about the preparation, think about how you want to present him, think about how you're going to approach this. He doesn't realise the perceived importance of heading down that centre line. And yeah, I was very pleased with the performance, and I think it's wise words that were said to me, and she might be sat on the screen to my left, that actually you should be able to come away from a test and be so pleased. Looking at the scoreboard is irrelevant. Now that would be a utopian place, because we all doing the sport we do, it's about being judged, literally.
And that's where, talking about being pleased about the test in Rio, I went and literally hid in the indoor arena for 5 minutes, away from media, away from the scores, away from competitors, because I wanted to literally savor those moments of just being thrilled with what me and my horse had just done.
Yeah.
Like that's it. No, because how many times are you thrilled with your test and you go to the scoreboard and it's a rubbish score, and then you're really not pleased with your test, or vice versa, you think it was a rubbish test, you go to the scoreboard, you got a good score and you're like, oh, that was great, because suddenly one person's opinion changes your opinion. And I think since lockdown, when scoreboards weren't happening and it took a day for sheets to come out or for scores to go up on websites, brilliant, because it makes people actually reflect themselves with their own knowledge before affected.
And I think I should say as well that the photograph that I put into the PowerPoint earlier on, where it was split screen between the Queen's Vase picture and then that silly grinning shot that my husband George had taken, that was when I came out from the test. I didn't know the score then. And it's almost that, because it was all online, so I had to wait until I was back up at the stables anyway. That's a genuine feeling of how pleased I was with how the test had gone. And actually, I think it's right sometimes that we should be recognised when we should be proud of ourselves for getting a grip, for shifting our comfort zone. And from that, confidence will come. That's not to say, we head back out after lockdown and it's not going to be a challenge for many of us. But, Sophie said, it's not the end of the world.
I praise myself when I get up and put a blazer on and get dressed at the moment in lockdown and don't sit in my pajamas. So it's little wins. Right, thank you. Really good discussion. Sophie, lots of praise for you sharing your story on the comments. So thank you for doing that. I've got quite a few questions, so I think we'll make sure Guy's still with us. Are you still there, Guy? Guy?
Yes, I'm here, sorry.
Yeah, just me. I thought you fell asleep.
No, I'm enjoying it, listening, yeah.
We've got quite a few questions for you, so I'm going to come to you first. Right, we've got quite a few people mentioning, I'll read this particular one out. She's had the horse for 4 years. When she's talking about join up here a little bit, but when she's in the arena doing join up, she gets the lowering of the head, she gets licking and chewing, but as soon as I go in, when I think he would follow me, he just stands there. I either end up sending him on again or just giving him a pat and leaving it there. Any tips?
Yeah, I mean, for me, break it down into 2 different sections. So when they find you, make sure you kind of rub on them. I always say rub them like you're spreading butter. So like, so it feels good to them.
Yeah.
And don't be too obsessed with the whole following them thing. Okay. Reward the fact they found you. That's the good bit. They found you, they're connecting to you. Okay. The next bit is the following, or what we call the mirroring, where their movement, they start to mirror your movement. Now, what I found is your angles here are really important. If you just leave, so like if the horse is facing you and you just leave so that you leave in a straight line, that horse can watch you leave. He can maintain connection because he's still watching you, he's still aware of you, but he can watch you leave. Now, if you leave on an angle, so say I'm looking at the horse, if I leave on a 45-degree angle, I go over here, then he has to make a decision. He'll turn his head and watch me leave. He either has to straighten himself out by moving his hind end around to face me again, or he chooses to ignore me. If he chooses to ignore me, at that point, I'll ask him to leave and to move. If he chooses to come with me, so that he just turns himself around and readjusts himself so that he moves his feet and he's focused on me, then I'll go back and I'll rub him and I'll repeat the process. So again, I'll leave on a 45-degree angle. He'll step around behind and he'll face me, and I'll go back in there and rub him. Okay. But I break it down into 2 things. Don't get too obsessed with having them follow you around. You're losing sight of of what the goal is in the exercise.
Okay.
It's a bit like when we were talking there about, you know, performance and winning being a goal. You know, winning is a byproduct of everything else that goes into it. You know, like you win if you're at peak performance and you're judged to be better than the other people. It's not something that you can control, and people get really obsessed with the end result. The process is what's important. You know, the things that, you know, working your horse at liberty are going to achieve is about, you know, creating some positive associations with maintaining connection and maintaining focus. So don't be constantly chasing them and irritating them and pissing them off because you're trying to get to your goal of having them follow you around. The fact that he's found you in the first place is good. Okay. Now you can build on that with your technique, like I said, to leave on those angles. But if you get it or you don't get it, it's not important if you sacrifice your relationship in the process.
Okay, thanks for that. There's quite a few questions about people that don't have the facilities to loose school. They don't have an indoor school, don't have an outdoor school. Any tips for them?
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't, again, don't get, I find it a really useful tool, but if you don't have the facility, then there's ways of doing it online or on a lead rope or something, or even, you know, with the ridden exercises as well, where you can go through different exercises where your focus is on where that horse is mentally and establishing a connection with your horse, establishing an awareness of where your horse is mentally, allowing him to work a little when he's disconnected, allowing him to feel comfortable when he's connected. And we have 3 fundamental groundwork exercises that I'll work with away from the liberty, that I'll work on in terms of gaining focus, gaining confidence, and gaining an ability to move and direct the horse's feet, you know, so that I can drive them in both directions.
And as you'd expect, a few questions about behavior that we don't want. So rearers, napping, we've got a couple of issues. I assume that they mean when they're being ridden, but any advice on where you would start if things are starting to go a little bit wrong?
I think sometimes I always feel like it's like calling someone and saying, what do you do when your car's parked in the ditch? How did it get in the ditch? You know, what led to that point? And this is what I always talk about. The best analogy I ever got, someone ever used to me, was that if you're driving your car down the motorway and that car starts to deviate into the next lane, you straighten your car up, don't you? You make sure that car's going straight. You don't wait till it's gone 3 lanes of traffic, the central reservation's parked in the ditch before you go, okay, well, now I better do something about it. A lot of times you've left it too late. And this is what I go back to what I was saying before about it all starts when you walk into that stable. At what point did you notice that horse had become disconnected? Or at what point did you notice that he never really was connected? Now, and this is why I was really interested to be part of this webinar, because I thought this is it. People are starting to understand that connection is so important. There's nothing more important. When you go, you want to be maintaining that connection at all times with your horse. And when you start to lose it, it's like you're driving your car on the motorway. You're going to end up in a ditch if you don't start to re-establish that connection. And that's what people are talking about when their horses are rearing or their horses are napping or whatever. It's that he's looking to get comfortable, okay? And at the moment, he's looking someplace else to find that comfort. If you cut your reins, you'd never get your horse to rear again. What you'd have him doing is running off to wherever he was trying to be. Does that make sense? Yeah. If you cut your reins, you'd never have your horse nap again. He'd just go and run off to wherever he wanted to be to find that comfort. So what we've got to do is, you know, for example, a horse that wants to nap, well, then maybe we go and work him where he wants to be and say, okay, yeah, we'll go down by the gate if you want to go down there, and we'll just trot around a little bit down by the gate. And when he doesn't want to be by the gate, we'll take him someplace else. You know, we've allowed him, like with the horse in the indoor arena at the start, we've allowed him to work a little bit at his thing to go, okay, I'm going to think about you again, and I'm going to reconnect to you because what I wanted to do there hasn't achieved the desired result. Do you see what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. One more question for you, Guy. This is from Audrey Venners. She said, what would you say the next step would be if the horse already focuses on you quite well? So taking it to the next step.
So we break our exercises down into 3 parts. We have mental exercises, physical exercises, task-based exercises. Your mental exercises are what we're talking about there, establishing confidence, connection, establishing an understanding and establishing a relationship, if you like. The physical exercises are things like your transitions, your leg yields, your shoulder ins, your circles, anything that involves where your focus is on trying to improve your ability to control and direct the horse physically. But your mind is on the physical elements. It's like, I want that hind foot to be a bit more here. I want that front end to be more here. I want him to be more in my outside rein. I want him to be more engaged. Those are physical things. You've established the connection. You've established the confidence, you've established the parameters of your relationship, and your horse feels good about those things. You can then take that into the physical. We don't normally sitting in the long grass with our horses with a faraway look, staring off into the sunset on the end of a rope. We want to ride these horses. And the whole point of all of this is to improve the relationship so we can ride them and enjoy them, and that we're not worrying about dying that day. And then the third element is the task-based exercises. This is where you put it to the test. This is like Sophie with her dressage, or me with my polo cross, or whatever you might be doing. You go, you ride that dressage test and you go, oh, my horse was scared of all those plant pots. I might need to work on some mental stuff to get him more confident. Or my circles weren't that good, or my transitions weren't that good. So maybe I need to go and work on those physical elements. And then when I go back to that task, when I go back to my dressage test, or I go back to my polo cross, or I go back to working a cow, or whatever it might be, then he's going to do that job that much better, because I've achieved what I wanted to achieve with the mental, I've achieved what I wanted to achieve with the physical, and I put it together with the task.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Guy. Sophie, a question for you now. This one is from Helen Sanderson. She says, I learned my dressage test really well, run through it absolutely fine at home on numerous occasions, but I go into the arena and go completely blank. Any tips for managing this?
It's very common. I have forgotten my test on numerous occasions at bigger competitions. It's a hard one. A lot of the time, obviously, you're forgetting the test because you've been put under pressure. So trying to develop different ways at home to put yourself under pressure should help that. So, for example, you could be running through your test and get a friend to stop you and say you've gone wrong, and then that makes you go, oh, have I gone wrong? And it puts you into an uncomfortable situation, and actually you haven't gone wrong, but then you've got to pick yourself up where you left off. Another good one is, dressage tests are patterns, so if you learn well from like the visual pattern, that's another good one, because they're often symmetrical, so then that makes it easier to remember. Walking through it on foot, so make a small arena so that you're physically going through it, and you could do that and physically go through it and make someone distract you whilst you're doing it, so that you're putting yourself under more pressure in a safe situation where doesn't even affect the horse, because you can just be running through it on your own 2 legs.
And perhaps, yeah, it does help. And perhaps look at the psychology of this, because the reason you forget the test actually is nothing to do with your riding skill or it's literally something to do more perhaps anxiety related, isn't it? So we've got to look at dealing with maybe that.
Yeah, it's asking yourself, like, why are you getting nervous? For what purpose are you getting nervous? A lot of the time it's because we've got a judge that is judging us, or we've got people that we respect the opinion of that are around the outside of the arena. But quite often, there's a lot of people that, are getting nervous just because there's people watching. And, that would be one thing that I would say is, do you respect the opinion of those people around the arena? And to be honest, there's within the chimp management model, which we use for psychology, we've got a troop. So I've got like 5 people within my troop that I would genuinely look to for good feedback and, constructive feedback. And if you're not going to go to them for good feedback, then don't go to them for criticism either. So for those people, I will take that feedback from, but for anybody else, everybody can have an opinion. They're going to have an opinion on you whether you take it or not. So let them. And quite often, you know, people are watching a dressage test and they're thinking about what they're having for tea, and everything else. They're not really concentrating and judging you. But yeah, definitely think about what elements of it that are making you feel uncomfortable.
And Julie, a question to you, similar lines, so you'll be able to link in from what I've just been chatting to Sophie about. This one's from Joanne Coe. She says, I'm guilty of putting pressure on myself every time I ride. This does sound like a common trait given tonight's conversations. How do I get around this? Should I set small achievable targets for each time I ride? Is that the best way to start?
Do you know what? Thank you, Joanne. That's a great question. And do you know what I love about the coaching, irrespective of where you are, is that within everybody, you've got the answer. So what I love there is that Joanne has questioned herself, and actually, Joanne, you've got the perfect answer there for yourself. Absolutely spot on. Small targets and make them achievable. There's a model that many people will have heard of, smart objective setting. There's so much that we do in our professional lives that we can map straight across into how we manage and develop ourselves when we're alongside a horse. And exactly as Joanna's just described there, small steps, the small wins. And even if it means that if it was a competing win or if it's just getting on, then stop when it's good. Because there is no rule book that I've ever found that says you have to ride every day for 40 minutes. It's changing that mindset and ride until you are happy, stop whilst you are happy, appreciate the small things. And yes, by all means, push yourself a little bit, but push yourself in the direction that you are choosing to go. I like what she says there about, you're putting yourself under pressure. The question has to be is, what is that pressure and where is it coming from? Because if we are doing it and we are applying it to ourselves, then consider coming at it from a different angle that you can control where it's coming from. You can control if you take it or not. Very similar to what Sophie's just said there about taking on board the opinions of others. I would take on board the opinion of somebody whose opinion mattered to me.
And that's absolutely a great point. I mean, think about who you surround yourself with. Think about who you listen to. I mean, I remember being at an event once and hearing somebody was a connection of somebody else who was quite nervous. They were about to go cross country and their other half came back and went, oh my God, I've just seen a horse go into that ditch at that fence there. So, think about very carefully the sort of people you're going to be around at that competition, as Sophie said. And Julie, one more thing actually before we head off. You obviously come at this a little bit as well from a business world, which I think is really good. And we spoke about other sports in this webinar too. It is important, isn't it? Take your inspiration and your coping mechanisms and from anywhere really. There's lots of places you can get help with strategies.
Yeah, absolutely. And actually appreciate how good you are, full stop. Irrespective of what environment you operate in, you are successful, because very few people are in our position where we are lucky enough to be amongst horses who aren't successful in their own right, because I think it's polite for me to say, there are cheaper hobbies for us to have. We work really hard at trying to be amongst our horses. So you are already successful. Try not to delineate between what is your work life and what is your horse life. There's so much that you can map across there. And even down to your goal setting, how you organize yourself. The great analogy is if you think how much attention we pay to what we feed our horses, how we manage them, stable management, and yet how many of us are very guilty that we will look after the horses, particularly on a competition day, we will look after the horses and suddenly get to your test and think, oh, I'm a bit drained, or I forgot breakfast. We just wouldn't do that for the horses. So there is a whole skill set that you already have in you. We just need to be able to get you confident to tap into that and transfer that skill.
Absolutely. Right. With Sophie.
Yeah, sorry. Can I just add as well before we go? And I think Guy will probably agree with this, but for me, probably the biggest thing that puts pressure on people to do things and then probably end up failing is the unrealistic expectation of how quickly it's going to happen, and that time pressure. So whether that is within a session, like you've only allowed yourself half an hour to ride, for example, because you're busy that day, guaranteed something is going to go wrong on those days, because you're probably more frustrated, you're thinking about what you've got to do next, and you've put more pressure on the horse at that moment. But also, you know, I've got so many people that come to me that want either a quick fix, or they want to, you know, they come and they're like, they've got an unrealistic expectation of competing in 2 months, you know, to do their first test when they're not walk, trot and cantering yet, for example. And for me, I'm much more of I don't do quick fixes. You know, I'd like to take time to figure stuff out and get things good for the long term. But people often create problems by being impatient and wanting to progress quickly, which often does the opposite. And when you're patient and you don't need things to happen quickly, they often happen quicker.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you've all given brilliant points tonight, and there's absolutely loads to take away. We've had one more question come in that's just said, Mark, you've done a great job hosting these. Thank you very much. I never get fan mail and nice questions and comments. And someone said it would be great to know your background to see whether you can actually do these webinars. Well, this webinar has actually been right at home for me because, yeah, just very quickly, my degree was in equine, was in sports coaching. Had horses for a long time. Eventing and jumping were my disciplines. And then I went on from then. I worked for Polly Stockton for a while initially, and then decided to take up commentating. I've commentated for about 14 years. And I have done a couple of Olympics, swimming, athletics, cycling, as well as equestrian, but much more at home with equestrian. But as I say, I've been lucky enough to commentate on Sophie and Julie in this webinar. And it's a great time to be part of RoR. And like Julie, actually, I've gone a little bit into the business world now. I've got a PR agency, so mixing things up. But horse is definitely where my heart lies. So thanks for that nice message. I never get those, so thank you. Sophie, Julie, Guy, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you very, very much for joining us this evening. And we'll see you again very soon.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
There's lots of benefits of registering with RoR. You can join for free and take advantage of loads of advice, camps and clinics. The competition membership is just £10 a year. Plenty of competitions and classes as well. As always, I should say as well, you can find out more at any time on the RoR website. And as a charity, we are committed to welfare and education. There are 8 RoR accredited rehoming centres in Great Britain. And again, you'll find out information about all of this, everything we've spoken about, and any upcoming events on the RoR website, where you can also make donations. That's ror.org.uk. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you again very soon.